Hello and welcome to another episode of CISO Tradecraft, the podcast that provides you with the information, knowledge, and wisdom to be a more effective cybersecurity leader. I'm your host, G. Mark Hardy, and today I'm going to talk with a very interesting fellow with whom I've had an opportunity to work with for a number of years, Chris Rothe, who is Red Canary, and not only with Red Canary, but was one of the founders. Now, a little bit of disclaimer up front is that I've been a customer of theirs for a while. And as a result, I am quite familiar with it. From time to time, you might even see this Red Canary swag back here that they have as a jacket. I have participated as an uncompensated member of their CISO Advisory Council and was even on one of their CISO debate series, which you can go Google around and you'll find it with that. So Red Canary's been around for quite a while in terms of just adding value to the community. I think it's one of the better companies that I've seen out there. Although it's not an infomercial, as you guys know, this is an educational program, but we're going to talk about cloud security, how to manage that, how to monitor that, and some of the direction that we're going in the future. So with all that, Chris, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you, and thanks for the kind words. Appreciate it.
I think you've heard them. Can you tell me a little bit about, or tell our audience a little bit about yourself and what got you into this? How did you end up co-founding Red Canary?
Sure. Well, I'm an electrical engineer. Loved computers since I was very young and ended up starting my career in the national defense space. Worked for Lockheed Martin for a number of years. And through a series of very fortunate things in my life, I ended up connected up with two other gentlemen who wanted to start this company. We worked inside of a company where Carbon Black was also incubated and spun out. And so kind of early in operationalizing endpoint detection and response. And so that's kind of how I got into it. Just really fortunate to meet the right folks at the right time and bring some of the practices and operational techniques that we used in the national security space over into the commercial sector to help organizations. So that's a short version of the story.
And it sounds great because it sounds like what we're talking about here is being able to take an expertise you developed in some sort of a work role, but at some point saying, hey, you will leave the nest and then go do our own thing. Which kind of brings me to the question, why the name Red Canary? It's kind of cool, and I love the logo, but why Red Canary?
Yeah, well, the simple part is canaries were detection devices for miners. So we're a detection and response company, and so fit from that perspective. And then Red is meant to communicate a level of seriousness. Like if we all know that false positives are the bane of existence in security, and especially in the MSSP space and MDR space. And so the connotation is it's a red alert. If you hear from us, like you need to take action. And again, that's a little bit of a nod to all three of our background in the national security space.
Well, it sounds great. Yeah, for people who aren't familiar with the role of a canary, the miners didn't take them down on the mine shaft because they like to listen to the noise. Canaries are very sensitive to oxygen loss. And if the bird's singing away when you're there chipping away down there like the Seven Dwarves, you're fine. But when the bird goes silent, you get worried. And when it's an ex-canary, it's like, you better get out of there because there's a problem. And so that's where the term came from that perspective.
Yeah, I used to try to suggest to our marketing team that we should use the tagline, "Let us die for you," but that never really caught on. So
yeah, I can see that. I can give your marketing team some credit for it. Maybe stop chirping or whatever, but I'm tempted to think of a Monty Python skit with the ex and things like that, but we'll move on from there. So when a lot of us started working in IT, there really wasn't a cloud. And today, I don't know of any organization that really can operate without it. But unfortunately, a lot of the investments that we made in security technologies over the years for the enterprise, witness my piece of artwork here, my old 4XP machines, that doesn't scale into the cloud and allow the enterprise solutions to fix solutions. I mean, when somebody started doing security, it was really endpoint focused. I've been around a while, and I remember when Virus Scan came out in 1987. It was created by a guy who used to be a programmer at NASA, worked for Booz Allen in the early 80s. I worked there in the mid 80s, and he's an employee at Lockheed Martin. Sounded familiar. He read about the brain computer virus and decided there's a business opportunity here. And the rest of this is history, but unfortunately, so was that founder, it's John McAfee. So this industry goes back quite a while, but we've seen sort of a generational approach to security in the cloud. We'd set up with like the CIS benchmarks. First of all, we have Center for Internet Security, had the top 20. We're now at the 18 critical security controls. But it'll do things like stop your configuration attacks, let you make sure that you've set your defenses correctly, but in a way you're just positioning your chess pieces on the board. it's going to miss things like identity abuse. If somebody goes ahead and grabs a real credential and then starts doing something with that real credential, the traditional approach doesn't work. So the next level we went into was anomaly analysis, where we look for known attacks. So a DDoS attack or some DLP alert goes off saying somebody is trying to exfil your entire customer database out. Yeah, you want to be alerted on that. But we're getting now into a more mature approach at all for an EDR, if you will, in the cloud environments. If somebody steals a single session cookie for AWS and you're there doing the monitoring, what would you observe with respect to, let's say, an S3 bucket exfil through a valid user access? Is that enough to set off alarms, or do you just miss that until all of a sudden you get a little note saying, oops, we don't know your files?
I tend to think of the cloud control plane as an operating system. So that's the analogy. Like if you think about a traditional endpoint, it's got networking services, storage services, compute services, sort of the same thing you get by way of the cloud environment. And so from that perspective, there's sort of a rhyming that happens there. And the core there is, what do you use to monitor the things that are happening on that operating system? And so in the cloud, it's not EDR telemetry necessarily for that control plane. Instead, it's the activity logs of the cloud platform. So in AWS, that would be CloudTrail, similar capabilities in AWS or in Azure and GCP. But it's effectively the API telemetry, everything that someone or an automated script is doing against that control plane. And the good news is that those are readily available. We don't have to install any third-party technology. They're provided by the cloud platform. So that's a leg up over what we had traditionally with endpoints, where we had to jam in kernel filter drivers and all kinds of stuff in order to get the telemetry that we needed at that operating system layer. So that's kind of the approach. And so when your scenario of, hey, someone stole a session token and was able to access this account and download data out of an S3 bucket, or maybe make it open publicly, that's something that's observable by way of that telemetry that comes through the activity layer.
Well, and that's a very good point, because for the most part, the logging that's available in apps today will let you know what's going on, but they're not letting you know real time. It's great when you have to do a report to go into the board and say, well, at exactly 2:13 in the morning on Sunday is when we went bankrupt, because that's when all of our crown jewels got exfiltrated out the back door. Not very helpful, right, in terms of being preventative. And so for organizations that have the time, the money, the resources, and the demand for it, they can stock up an entire security operations center. And you get a big SOC running, and it's your own private SOC. Well, that's great, because now you've got analysts, you've got people that are working there, and they're there 24/7. But even then, the issue is there enough to keep them interested? So we'll come back to manpower in a little bit, but look also at the idea of working with these third parties. So way back in 2000, I worked for a startup MSSP called Guardant. And I remember thinking, why would anybody allow their most sensitive information to be shared with and monitored by a third party? Well, the answer, of course, is that a lot of organizations can't scale their security function as fast as they can grow their IT environment. Companies back then, remember, this is just before the dot-com crash, and we survived. I had another job opportunity that I did not take, mostly because my wife didn't want to go out and live in a smaller house out in Silicon Valley, but that was to go work with Bruce Schneier at Counterpane at the time to run his managed security services. And so I'd helped Bruce review one of his books, Secrets and Lies, and we get together from time to time. But he's done some amazing stuff in the community and with his writing and his blogging. I mean, I can't say enough good things about him. But what I found out there is that by creating this MSSP, then those gaps that are going to be unable to be monitored can be filled by somebody who knows what's going on. Now, what is going to motivate a company to pull in a third-party provider as compared to just say, we can do it ourselves? And then how would a CISO know when it's the right time in the growth of the company or the complexity of their IT infrastructure to know that they ought to explore that option?
Yeah, in my mind, there's a pretty simple trade-off, which is, hey, we know as a business that we have a lot to protect, whether it's our money, it's our IP, et cetera. And we're not a large enough company to justify the security expenditure to staff up a full security operation. If you just sort of think about what it takes to actually build out a 24/7, 365 detection response capability, to run 3 shifts, 8 to 12 people, that's pretty out of reach for most, at least mid-sized and smaller organizations. And frankly, they won't have enough to do. There aren't that many things to monitor. So it's a little bit of, do you really want to staff that team and have them stare at empty dashboards most of the time? So that's one of the benefits of the MSSP or MDR model is being able to kind of concentrate those resources so that same 8 to 12 people can operate across 10, 100, 1,000 companies as opposed to just one. And you get some of the herd immunity across that as well. So that's the traditional reason is, hey, we know we need security, but we don't have the budget or the kind of the desire to build out a full mature security team in-house.
Got it. I'm writing down a little concept, a herd of canaries. It's
Well, we like the word flock internally, but
of course.
Flock.
But we mentioned, and a lot of us talk about MSSPs and MDRs and things like that, but sometimes we kind of skip past that. So for the benefit of our listeners who think they might know but aren't absolutely sure but are embarrassed to ask, how would you explain the difference between an MSSP and MDR?
Sure. They're I don't know, we're on this bird theme. Their genus and species isn't too far away from each other. They're in the same family, but traditional MSSP capability was, we'll run your firewalls for you, we'll run your antivirus for you, we'll make sure it's running. Maybe we'll be the help desk when you need to make a firewall change. We're there with an incident response service if you do have a breach. And then also we'll do sort of tier 1 triage of your security alerts. So when something goes off, we'll do sort of the basic sorting and filtering. Maybe also we'll run your logging program. We'll store your logs for your compliance purposes or whatever else. So the way we like to think about it in modern times is it's a pretty thin but broad layer of security for an organization. And it's important. It's like certainly a place for it for companies that don't want to run any of their own security infrastructure. The difference between that and MDR from our perspective is that if you're going to hire someone to do detection or response for you, their goal should be to detect everything that is bad in your environment, and then take action on it, or help you take action on it. And so it's a narrower service. It's more focused on detection and response. We're not going to run firewalls for you. We're not going to do your vuln management program, those types of things. But we are going to be super deep in detection across the areas that matter most in your environment. And where did that come from? That came from the early 2010s, where companies had gotten pretty good at securing their perimeters, pretty good at basic security programs, but breaches were still happening. And they were still happening because it was relatively straightforward for an adversary to get a payload onto an end user's endpoint, and then pivot from there into other parts in their environment. So that really led to the rise of EDR. And then to make use of the vast telemetry that EDR creates, the MDR layer was important on top of that. So kind of went off the rails there for you a second, but that, to me, that's the difference between MSSP is broad and thin versus narrow and deep.
So as for a doctor, it's the difference between a GP and a specialist.
Yeah.
And if you know that you have a concern, this is great, but I want somebody who really practices this, who does it day after day, and that's their expertise.
Yeah.
And so I think of an MSSP that said, okay, that's great if you have little to no resources, but it really doesn't give you the follow through. They will help point you to the log entry that said you went bankrupt at 2:13 in the morning Sunday. But as a managed detection or response service, you're actually going to be creating the alerts and not just telling people what's going on, but doing something about it. As I mentioned before at the beginning of the show, I am a customer. And so I have things set up where I will get an alert, and just as a little nod to certain video games, when I get my alert, I get, this is Red Canary calling. Wake up and smell the ashes. something had just caught fire in your network, and it works. And I've done a couple of tests, and I found that the response rate is sometimes frighteningly fast. It's like, wow, these guys are just sitting there, men and women doing it. But if we think about it, if all you do is ingest security alerts and then filter some out and send them back to you, we basically say, hey, here's your alert stack, and here's the thing you care about. That's kind of great, but it sounds like you do beyond that with an MDR. You're actually doing some analysis and putting a brain onto it. Say, yeah, not that one, but this one didn't rank high with something's low and slow. How do we differentiate? How do you get people to actually figure that stuff out? Is it all AI now? Is everybody's AI, or you just have a lot of smart people?
Yeah, a few different questions in there. I love the AI debate, but yeah. And I should say, MDR, there's not a single definition, and there isn't a single approach that all managed detection and response vendors take. Our approach is really to take that, take the idea of we're not going to let you get breached, and to make that promise or to commit that to our customers. That means we have to find threats that your security products don't. And so to us, it's the mix of you've got detection products in your network, in your environment already. They send over alerts. We want to make sure we look at those and correlate them and filter down to the ones that are really important. That's one leg of it. But honestly, that's the shorter leg. The stronger leg is detection analytics based on the source data for those environments. So endpoint detection response telemetry, the activity telemetry on every endpoint, that's fundamental in your traditional sort of endpoint environment. Also extends into the cloud. I mentioned before monitoring the cloud control plane, but it's also super important to monitor your workloads in the cloud, the things that look like endpoints, they're running Linux or Windows or whatever. You need to do the same detection and response there. And then moving over into the identity space, monitoring the login and activity telemetry there to make sure that we can detect impossible travel and other things like that, compromised identities. So from our perspective, it's the alerts that come out of your security products. That's great. It's great context. But we apply our own detection analytics to really drive out the vast majority of these threats. And the reason sometimes people have a hard time understanding, well, wait a minute, why wouldn't the security product or the detection product do a better job than you of detecting things? And the answer is that all those products have to be tuned to a certain level of false positives, right? If you're a piece of security software and you are just bombarding your users with lots and lots of alerts, and a lot of them are false positives, pretty soon they're going to get dissatisfied with your product and turn it off or churn out as a customer. And so we have this advantage where, because we have a security operations team that is in seat 24/7 working in our platform, which allows them to do their job and do their investigations really, really efficiently. Because we have that, we can crank up that sensitivity of detection to 11 and really look for those things that a lot of them are false positives, but false positives don't get to the customer. They land on our team to investigate and decide what to do with. And so that's the model. And you made sort of a medical analogy. Here's one for you. If you think about testing for diseases, let's say cancer, there are tests that will find if you have cancer. And a lot of times those don't get run because they're not specific enough. Like they're maybe 50% accurate. And you don't want to run a test on somebody and say, hey, there's a 50% chance you have cancer unless you have some other indicator. And so that's the way to look at it. We're happy to run those 50% tests all day, every day, and deal with the baggage that comes with that. Whereas most detection companies are like, no, we don't want to deal with that. We only want to deal with the highly sensitive tests, specific tests that tell us that it is cancer. So kind of a weird analogy if you can follow it, but that's the way we think about it.
But I get that. And again, for those who just came back from RSA, we go there and the phone book size directory of all the different vendors out there. And everybody's something got a little bit here, a little bit here, a little here, like that. And if you look at it, these days it's almost impossible to completely fund the entire vertical stack. Okay, Apple did it years ago and they created their own ecosystem. But you don't have a closed ecosystem, do you? If I already have an EDR solution that I like a Carbon Black, or if I'm using Microsoft and using those tools and Defender, any reason I can't just plug them into your system and let you guys watch, or does that require a whole bunch of effort to get there?
No, I mean, our approach is we support the products that create the data that we need, right? And so in the EDR space, in the endpoint space, whether you're using Carbon Black, CrowdStrike, Defender, SentinelOne, Palo Alto, like all of those are supported by Red Canary. And the bar for us is, do they create telemetry? Do they actually create telemetry at the level that we can apply our detection analytics? Because there's a long tail of EDR products out there that just don't. So that's the criteria there. So certainly if someone already has it, bring it in. If you're looking for it, we can help you select one. If you're looking for that moving, we can help give our opinion on where you might want to go. And then similarly in the identity and the cloud space, support the major cloud vendors, support the major identity platforms. That's sort of our view of the world. We don't want to create a bunch of our own sensors and our own technology that forces people to deploy or force you to use one of those, use our one specific technology. We look at it as a best of breed solution.
And that makes good sense from a perspective, because since some organizations are already invested in these technologies, it's great that they have them. But again, there's no way to follow up. If you've activated Defender, I'll wake up in the morning and I'll get some emails. Oh, we detected this, we detected that. And I got so many false positives from there. It's like, yeah, I'm not even going to worry about it. And when you do get a bad run that comes in, then how do you get that to break out of the noise? But it sounds like by using a managed detection response service, you've got somebody else who's going to be up at 2 a.m. anyway. It's part of their job. They're working the night shift. They go, like, yeah, not that. The other interesting thing I like is that one of the frustrating things I think I've had, and today I'm interviewing people for a job. I've had 9 interviews scheduled trying to find somebody. Anybody out there wants to do IT support in Washington, D.C., let me know. And one of the things that I'm going out to is I'm finding there's a lot of job openings, but the ratio of job openings to people in the industry is a little bit different than it is in some other lines of business. So where do you think we stand from that perspective? And is that holding organizations back from just saying, we're going to do it ourselves, but is it actually driving business toward organizations like yours where you get to, if you will, be the fire department and manage security for a bunch of folks? Does that even attract the best people? Because they want to see all those different variety of things instead of just like the Maytag repairman waiting for something to break.
Yeah. Yeah, you're hitting on some key themes of MDR. So one way to look at like what the security challenges are if you zoom out several levels, a lot of the challenges are just aren't enough qualified people to do information security for the businesses and in this world. And you mentioned the staffing. Like that's one thing I like to track is how many open job recs are there in information security versus how many people are actually employed in information security. And right now the ratio is like 0.5 to 1. So every person employed in security could have another half of a job. It's a pretty unhealthy ratio. Like a healthy ratio, kind of supply demand for jobs like sales or software engineering tends to be sort of 5 to 1 to 7 to 1. And so we're like 1.5 to 1, if my math is correct. Not really sustainable. And so that's the kind of core problem, is that even if you have the budget, if you have the buy-in from your board to go build out an 8 to 12 person team to monitor your environment, the chances of finding those qualified people is pretty tough. And the likelihood that they're going to leave pretty soon after you hire them is also pretty high. And so in our world, like we don't have challenges keeping security analysts in our team because they love, like you said, working across a lot of different customers, but they also love working with security people really closely in a company that values security. And you kind of think of, hey, you're going to go be the security analyst for a bank or something like that. You're not necessarily like someone there that everyone is excited to work with all the time. Sometimes you're the department of no, and it's super valuable, super important, and we love those people. But there is like a different side of it where you can work in a security company. So for us, the staffing problem isn't as acute as it is for a lot of organizations. And that is fundamentally why you look to solutions like MDR. The other aspect of it is, in the end, the threats that we all face are largely the same. There are certainly sector-specific threats and organizations need to take care of those. But at the fundamental level, most people are using Windows, Mac, Linux for their endpoints, GCP, AWS, Azure for the cloud, Okta, Microsoft for identity. Your productivity suite is going to be one of a small number of choices. And so what that means is adversary attention is focused there. And so those threats that land in those environments are common. And so it really, in a lot of ways, doesn't make sense for most organizations to go out and build their own bank of detection analytics that's going to look exactly like the set that the company down the street does. Allow folks like us to be that kind of common layer. And then you can move up the stack and focus on more strategic things, more business specific things. So that's another way to look at it.
Yeah. And if you think about it, if you had mentioned this earlier from a staffing perspective, I used to stand watches in the military. And so when you had a 24/7 watch, which we had served on, you say, okay, that's 24 hours a day. And you do that 365 days a year. You do the math and you divide by, 40-hour weeks. But it doesn't really work that way. Right. Because what you'll find out is that you have 40, 80, 120, 168, but you've got a couple weeks vacation, you got time. So at a minimum 5 people to keep a single desk seat warm. Yeah. And even that's pretty intense, because you don't get any flexibility. You can't go off and do your conferences and your training. And when you throw in all the mandatory stuff that corporations throw at you for activities, or especially in the military, it's only 6-1. Well, okay, that's fine. But then we got this double multiplier on there, and that is the cost of actually having someone on a payroll. And so somebody comes in and let's pick a random number, $100,000 a year. Well, you're going to have to pay the FICA and the Social Security on that and the Medicare. Then there's going to be the unemployment, which is not that much necessarily, but depends on what state you are in your loss experience. But then healthcare, which could really be a killer depending upon what your premiums are. Plus the fact that you keep the lights on and you issue a box of business cards and you have coffee in the coffee machine and things like that. When you add it all up, I know that when I was at Booz Allen years ago, we thought a minimum multiple was about 1.7 something. That is to say, it would cost us 170% of a salary just to break even. So if we were billing out at 175, you were on a razor thin margin, and you better have nobody show up late for work, nobody miss a day, and nobody quit, and no interruptions. But reality is you needed more than that. And a lot of people don't necessarily think about it that way. I've talked to executives who say, oh yeah, it's like 1.1, 1.5, 1.15. No, it's not.
Right.
And so to a certain extent, when you have a job that's like being in a fire department, where not all the houses are going to catch fire at once. And so it's perfectly adequate to have a fire department that's looking out for a neighborhood. And if it has to, you can ring a second alarm and bring somebody else in, and stuff like that happens. And so what you've articulated here is a value proposition of not only being able to attract some of the most qualified people because they got an interesting environment to work in, but you retain them. And so I'm going to suspect, but I can't speak for you, that you've got probably a lower than average turnover right there, because it just sounds like a really cool job to be doing.
Yeah, I mean, and we pride ourselves on building tools that make analysts really efficient. We also have sort of a unique model in our security operations center. We don't actually call them analysts. We call them detection engineers, and that's a really explicit title because not only are they investigating potential threats and writing them up for customers, but they also are meant to look at those threats and say, what we miss here, and then build out new analytics that immediately get fed back into the engine. So there isn't like a separation between the people who write the detection and the people who have to deal with the alerts. It's a cohesive unit. And that's a really attractive job to a lot of folks who maybe have been in a SOC and just kind of like been banging their way through alerts for a long time. So yeah, that's kind of the way we think about it. It's the way we love our security team. They are the beating heart of our business, and we don't necessarily like treat them like royalty, but they are what ends up delivering the value to our customers. And the fact that we can deploy them across a wide range is really valuable.
And again, I've had good interaction with these folks. It's like, you give them well done. And oh, by the way, you get follow up. How do we do? And things like that. And this is in general for people who are listening to the show. If somebody does a good job for you, whether they work for you, whether they work for somebody else, you get these little surveys that come in. And I don't have time to answer a 37-question survey with how good was your support. But if they said happy smiley down to frown and then click the happy smiley face and said, great, we glad you love it. Optional. You don't want to say anything more. Nope, submit. That's a good feedback loop. It keeps it simple. You're likely to get a second and a third and a fourth response because they know it's not going to eat up a lot of time. And that works out well. So I like what you've done there.
Good.
Another cool thing I think you've done at Red Canary is creating the Atomic Red team.
Yeah.
And of course, has been a really cool concept. We could get the t-shirt somewhere in here. And what was the idea behind that when you started, and what does it do for people today?
Yeah, well, brief intro, Atomic Red Team is an open source project. And where it came from was probably like 2017, 18, something like that. People would try to test our detection capabilities and proof of concepts, or even for customers that were working with us. And typical pattern was we'll go on VirusTotal and download 50 malware samples, run them all on the same endpoint, and then come back to Red Canary and say, hey, you only caught 12. It's like, well, that's not how adversaries work. That's not really a realistic test. We need to change the way we think about that. And so the concept behind Atomic Red Team was, let's make it super easy to just run these really small tests in any environment. So the idea is most of them, you can open up a command prompt, copy paste out of Atomic Red Team into that command prompt, run it, and that'll test some technique. Around the same time, maybe a little bit later, MITRE ATT&CK came along, and that excited us a lot because we had our own sort of taxonomy of of classifying threats and techniques. And now we were able to use one that was out there in public and well maintained, thanks to all the great work of that team. And so we refactored Atomic Red Team to be aligned to attack techniques. And from there, it's just grown. Red Canary is still core maintainer of Atomic Red Team, but we have others from large security teams, large companies, and many others. It's got a really, really broad community that supports it, and a lot of derivative projects around it to automate the execution of tests and things like that. It's really a cool community that started really just from our own need to help organizations test us better, and more so than us, test their own security tooling.
Yeah, I know that it's almost, you mentioned about that, it reminds me of the antivirus. They created the ICAR, the European Institute for Computer Antivirus Research, where you'd have this character string, you submit that, and then all antiviruses are going to agree that, hey, we will detect that.
Yeah.
And so then what you can do is you can alert on that. But what you're saying is sort of a similar thing where you could go ahead and do some tests.
Yeah.
The quick side note. So I remember a couple of years back doing a test where we went through and used one of the testing tools that had all these scenarios. I'm not going to mention the company's name. If you want me to mention it, they can come and get their own episode. But what we did is we spaced out a number of tests over a period of time, and then we would get responses saying, hey, we alerted on that. Well, what I thought was interesting is last year we had an intern in, and she wanted to go ahead and run some tests. And I said, well, here's the test tool that we have. We have a license for it. And if you run these tests, then what we should be doing is I'll be getting all these alerts from Red Canary. And what was interesting is I don't know whether she just didn't update the database because she wasn't familiar with it, but she went, boom, instead of doing this once every few minutes, she just fired off 20 some odd attacks back to back. Right. And it's like, oh my goodness, you should have lit up the switchboard. And I got no alerts. I'm thinking, oh, come on. What's going on, Red Canary? I get ready to call up and said, Whiskey Tango Fox right over. But I checked my logs, and it turned out that every single one of those attacks had been blocked by Microsoft Defense. Yeah. So the test environment has to continually update. You can't use last year's tests this year. As you point out, it's not a realistic type of a scenario for an attacker. But more importantly, is it can give you either a false sense of security, saying, hey, it blocked everything. Why do I need an MDR service when my tools are working perfectly? And yet we take a look at the 8Ks that gets filed by companies. We find out that, yeah, there are a lot of things that do get through, and we have to be careful about that. So one of the things I mentioned about the Atomic Red Team, but the other thing I think that you produce is of great value, and I'll compare it to the Verizon DBIR. That's their go-to document every year for breach information. This year's report I read through, it's 100 pages. However, Red Canary publishes an annual threat detection report, which, in my opinion, is a lot more relevant to CISOs because it shows the threats to their own enterprise and not just necessarily something that went wrong somewhere else that might have gone through a mechanism that wouldn't even have been exposed to. Plus, you've got embedded music clips for enhanced reading. I noticed that. That was pretty cool. What do you think are the most important insights that your team has found this past year, and any top-level recommendation you could offer for security leaders?
Yeah, well, first and foremost, the Verizon DBIR report is a legend, and I read it every year. It's super useful. So certainly don't want to compare the two and say ours is better, but we're really proud of what we produce on an annual basis with the threat detection report. And the idea of it is it just tells you about the trends and everything that we saw over the last year of detection in our array of customers. So it'll show you that what I saw a Twitter sort of back and forth happening when we launched the threat detection report this year, that PowerShell continues to be a very, very common technique that we see leading to threats. And there's a discussion on X, I guess, about how, well, wait a minute, I thought PowerShell was dead. And that led to some really good back and forth that we saw out there of like, well, look, just because, to your point, the defense and preventative tooling have gotten better at stopping it and better at disabling things that it can do, it doesn't mean that it's necessarily dead. It's still something that can get through if you don't have things configured the right way. So the way I think about it is, as detection and prevention and all that tooling gets better, that's great. But it doesn't mean we just go turn off all that detection that we've built up over time. Like, all those things are still relevant. Those techniques are still relevant. And at some point it's like, okay, cool, but we need to make sure and detect the next set of things for sure. But if you don't have that baseline of everything, at some point somebody's going to accidentally leave a machine open, not have it configured in the way that that the woman working for you did, and it is going to get through. So anyway, so that's what I like about the threat detection report, is that it's practical, and it's like, look, we're not trying to highlight just the most advanced techniques here. We're telling you this is what is getting through. This is what got through in the last year. Here's the different ways maybe that adversaries are using it, different examples, and then practical advice about what you should do in terms of detecting it. So I think it's a really valuable resource. We also, for our customers, we certainly don't wait a year to share this type of insights with them. Within the Red Canary product, you're going to get intelligence insights, intelligence profiles, bulletins, things like that on a pretty regular basis.
And I get those, and monthly I get to see. Here's Mimi Cats. I mean, here it is Benjamin Duke.
Still here.
Still here. It's still doing its thing, scraping stuff out of memory and things like that.
Yeah.
And I believe your report had like 60,000 different events that were all kind of consolidated in there. So a huge sample space, which is, in a way, it's a little bit frightening, but it's also reassuring that we've got that much to look at, which means the trends that you're seeing really are genuine macro trends. Yeah. It's not, hey, I've got a very small sample space, 2 guys and a dog, and therefore this is all we see is what's out our back window.
Yeah.
You're able to look at things like that. As we migrated from endpoints to basic cloud, to now we're going to serverless computing, containerization, and things such as that. How is that impacting our ability to defend that? Can you actually get the equivalent of an EDR tool into a serverless Lambda function or some container that's up there in Kubernetes and actually report back? Or are these things too ephemeral to be useful? It's a reporting tool, and if so, how do we protect them?
Right. Well, I think each technology is kind of has to be looked at on its own. And the question to ask is, what does it actually mean to compromise like a serverless function, as an example? What does that mean? And that one, as an example, I think what it means is someone got access to your cloud control plane. They edited that serverless function and they injected their own code, or they created their own function or whatever. So when you think about it from that perspective, you say, well, how would we detect that? Well, you don't necessarily have to like look at the code. You might want to for context. And you don't necessarily need to inject an EDR that says, hey, this serverless function did these things. You can start with just detecting that, hey, somebody edited this serverless function, and it's someone who's not done it before, or it's an unusual pattern for your organization. So I think that's the way I look at it, is what does it actually mean to compromise these things? Whereas traditionally, like, we think of it in terms of, hey, you got access to an endpoint and then you persisted and you moved laterally and that kind of stuff. That pattern doesn't necessarily hold when it's an ephemeral thing, right? Similar story for a container. Container spins up if it's a short-lived container, and the compromise isn't injected in the source code or injected in the base image or anything like that. Well, assuming it went away, like, that really didn't give the adversary any foothold unless they were able to maybe...
Unless you're using it as a jump box or something like that to create some persistence somewhere else. But you would see things like that with all the data that you look at and these new and evolving threats, which experience I had 10 years ago when I started a fraud prevention company called CardKill. And our tagline was, we can preemptively kill stolen credit cards before they get used in fraud. And the reason was, we looked at a lot of information and we could detect these really faint signals and break them out from the noise, where a single bank would have too much noise to see it. And what would have been successful for that was to be able to get enough data coming in to do it. But for other reasons that were not part of the show, it turned out that was a problem, I think, that some banks just didn't want to solve.
Sure.
In any case, you've got that signal, and you've got a good signal-to-noise ratio. And as a result, it seems that you're on top of spotting trends. You can spot what are the top ways that attackers are working. And from that, though, I'm wondering, do you have any predictions? What do you think our cloud security, both from the defense as perhaps even the attackers, are doing over the next few years? And what can we better do to position ourselves to protect the future?
Yeah, well, I think if you just think about the cat and mouse game that is information security, adversaries go to sort of the weakest point and the weakest thing where they can make the most impact or steal the most, whatever they're after. And so right now, I think we would say like endpoints and identity are still like the softer targets. And so for now, that's sort of a huge focus. Cloud is the most emerging. And it's funny to say that because the cloud's been around for 15 years at this point. But and certainly there's been lots of attacks in the cloud, lots of data loss and things like that. But the control plane has not yet been like the focus of a lot of adversary attention. We're seeing that change. The rise of threats, where the way to think about it from my perspective, more as a technologist than as a security person, is, hey, if an adversary gets into my control plane, they can spin up as much infrastructure as they want to do whatever they want. So less so, I'm certainly worried about our data that's sitting in our S3 buckets and sitting in our databases and all that kind of stuff. But I'm also worried about them spinning up a huge bank of crypto miners in an AWS account that they create that maybe none of our team even sees. And I don't know about it until my next billing cycle, where they say, hey, you're running 1 million GPU instances over here. Now, obviously the cloud providers have detection that allows them to find that kind of stuff. But that's the way I tend to think about cloud threats right now, especially cloud infrastructure threats, is once they get in, what can they do in terms of leveraging your bank account, your infrastructure, as opposed to, hey, let's treat it like a traditional network security use case of protecting the data. You got to do that too. But the new part of it is, what can they do if they can stand up as many instances as they want?
Yeah, that's a good challenge, and I think something that means that we've got to be monitoring that and having somebody else who knows what they're doing to look over your shoulder for you, particularly when you're out trying to do something else, like get on with your life. Someone else is doing that as part of their routine. So we're getting close to the end of the show. Are there any follow-up thoughts you had, or someone says, hey, this is fascinating, I want to learn more about these guys? How do they do so? How would they approach that?
Sure. Well, we have a website. redcanary.com would be the best way to get in touch with us. Highly recommend, if the threat detection report stuff was of interest, it's all out on the website. Lots of material around that, lots of video being created and other things to make it really digestible. So I think that's a great call out, is come interact with it. And we love talking to security people. We're not going to try to jam our product down your throat and sell it to you. So reach out and have a conversation with us. We'd love to help with whatever we can.
Well, I love the fact that even as a founder all these years later, you still got the technical chops to be able to wade into a podcast like that and talk about things. So good on you. And I think it speaks highly of the way that you run the business, both because my interaction and just as somebody who's run a bunch of things, is to appreciate your leadership style. And I think your people do too.
Thanks.
So for our listeners or watchers, if you're watching us on YouTube, this has been Chris Rothe, one of the founders of Red Canary. And of course, I'm your host, Mark Hardy, and we've been talking about cloud security using a managed security provider versus managed detection and response. MDR, I think, is really the more complete model that we talked about, where it's a bit deeper into that and the like. We've looked at some of the issues with regard to staffing your own people, just trying to find qualified candidates and attract and retain them. There's always job offers someplace else. Someone's going to try to buy them away for another $5,000. And plus the cost of just maintaining a 24/7 watch is quite expensive. And then also we take a look at some of the different tool sets reports, the availability that's out there, the threat detection report, which we'll put a link to that in our show notes, but also things such as the Atomic Red team, that you've done a lot of above and beyond contribution to the community, which makes me kind of a privilege to have you guys on the show. So for our listeners, if you're not following us on LinkedIn, please do so at CISO Tradecraft. We have over 30,000 followers there, and we do more than just podcasts. We put out a high signal, low noise, almost a regular daily feed of information to help you out with your career journey. If you're watching us on YouTube, great. Don't forget to subscribe. And if not, have someone else come subscribe. Get our numbers up. We're just below the threshold where they're going to stop throwing ads at us. And that's really our goal, is to do that. We're not trying to boost ad revenue. We're trying to actually get rid of them. So if you've got any feedback or questions for us, you can reach us at CISO Tradecraft. Again, best place to look for us is on LinkedIn. But until next time, we appreciate you being part of our audience, and stay safe out there.